participants who have started to join us. It looks like this is now streaming live on YouTube, just so everyone is aware.
Okay, I just saw that. So for those of you viewing, we're just getting ready to go live. We're just sorting out some technical matters, so please stand by.
This is now streaming live on YouTube, just so everyone is
aware. Okay, I just saw that. So for those of you viewing, we're just getting ready to go live. We're just sorting out some technical matters. There's obviously a bit of a delay. I just heard myself, so it's just the delay. There's always a bit of a delay when it hits YouTube.
Okay.
Just fine.
Well, let me know when it's time for me to start.
Not quite at the hour. We have 5 minutes to go.
Okay.
So I'm just going to turn my camera off for now. And have fun. This is great. Thank you everyone for participating into the Chamber for organizing this.
Mm-hmm. Looking forward to it. So we got 5 minutes left, have we?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Is everybody else on or off? Okay. I'll start right at 7 o'clock.
Yes, we want to start at 7 sharp.
Okay.
Karen and Dawn, there is somebody has sound coming from their computer and that's sounding in the background. If you can go on mute unless you're speaking, that would be awesome.
Okay, I'm assuming I'm speaking. It's not coming from my computer.
Yeah, you'll be starting. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Mm.
2 minutes.
Okay. Be quiet over there, okay? The pregnant pause. Here we are. Will we hear that echo?
Nope, the sound is good.
Okay.
We'll start in 1 minute.
All right. I'm going to go by my computer clock. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, fellow Zoomers and YouTubers across our electoral district. I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional territories of the Pacheedaht, Sauk, Chiinaw, Esquimalt, and Songhees Indigenous peoples, on whose territories the Langford Fuca constituency resides. My name is Don Brown. I'm a member of the Souk Multi-Belief Initiative, a nonpartisan volunteer organization of individuals from diverse religious, ethical, and spiritual traditions, working together to develop the Souk community as a haven of unity and compassion. To mitigate the polarizing divisiveness of our partisan political elections, we have developed a non-confrontational format for this evening's program. This format was used successfully in the 2019 federal election in our riding, and we are invited to use this same approach for this election. The forum is not a debate. Last week, the candidates were sent a list of 6 priority issues based on a survey in our electoral district. They were asked to prepare presentations of the specific actions their parties will take over the next 4 years to address each issue in turn for 3 minutes. The candidates were also given guidelines regarding their conduct at this forum. Their presentations are to be non-confrontational. There's to be no criticism of other candidates, party leaders, or other parties' actions. They're asked to state the benefits of their proposed programs without belittling other parties' platforms or making comparative statements of how their initiatives are better than the other parties' programs. They were also asked to make their presentations personal. This will give us some insight into the quality of the characters of the individuals. The candidates have all agreed to this format and to these conduct guidelines for this forum. The 6 categories to be addressed are addictions and mental health, economic recovery, affordable housing, transportation, climate change, and Indigenous peoples' relations. In closing, I'd like to thank Britt Stankowski, Executive Director of the Souk Region Chamber of Commerce, and Julie Lawler, Executive Director of the West Shore Chamber of Commerce, the co-hosts of this forum, for their excellent services, collaboration, and consultation. Now, Karen Mason, President of the Souk Region Chamber of Commerce, will introduce the candidates and our moderator for this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. In alphabetical order of their last name, we have Gord Baird, BC Green Party, presently sits as second-term councillor in the District of Highlands, Vice Chair of the CRD Regional Water Supply Commission, and Commissioner for the Juan Fuca Water Distribution Commission. For the last 15 years, Gord has been the co-owner of EcoSense Living, a resilient and diversified business that focuses on integrated regenerative design systems for water, energy, food, and buildings. Kelly Darwin, BC Liberal Party, owns and operates Seriously Creative, a digital marketing agency. He is a small business advocate, co-hosts the West Shore Business Podcast, and sits on the board of the West Shore Chamber of Commerce, where he serves as secretary and new member liaison. John Horgan has been the MLA for the Langford Wanda Fuca region since 2005 and BC's premier since 2017. John has worked in both federal and provincial governments, and both he and his wife of 36 years, Ellie, have been small business owners. A dad to 2 sons, a coach, and a mentor, he and his family have been proud to call Langford in their home since 1992. Mitzi Dean is representing John Horgan tonight. Mitzi has been the MLA for the Esquimalt-Metchosin since 2017 and has lived and worked in the West Shore, Souk, Port Renfrew, and the region for the last 15 years. Tyson Strandlin, Communist Party of BC, is a Métis activist and a Communist Party organizer born on Vancouver Island with a long history of involvement with the environmental, student, peace, anti-racist, and anti-colonial movements. Tyson is in the process of completing his master's degree at UVic in the History Department's Cultural, Social, and Political Thought program and hopes to pursue a PhD in future. Moderating tonight, it is my pleasure to introduce Her Worship, Mayor Maya Tate. Maya.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm very pleased to be the moderator for tonight's all-candidate debate or discussion. So how this is going to work is, as noted, every candidate will be speaking in alphabetical order, and I will be introducing and timing each candidate. So as soon as I introduce the candidate, I will start the timer, at which time they have 3 minutes to make their remarks. At the 2.5-minute mark, I will turn my video back on. So that's a visual cue to the candidates that they have 30 seconds remaining. And when the 3 minutes has been completed, I will simply interrupt and thank the speaker for their remarks. Right now, we're in what's called the webinar format of Zoom. So all of the candidates have the ability to turn their cameras on and off and to mute and unmute themselves. So they will be doing that themselves. Should the rules not be followed, in which case we'll change their status and I'll make those remarks out loud. And then I will then be able to mute and turn off the video or actually push the candidate out of the meeting. But we're assuming that's not going to happen. And we just look forward to hearing the remarks from all of our candidates. So we're going to start off now. And the first one here is each candidate will have the opportunity to present the specific actions that their party will take over the next 4 years to address each of these following issues. So the first one up is resolving addictions, mental health, and homelessness. Our first speaker tonight is Gord Baird. And Gord, you now have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam. Is it okay to call you Madam Mayor? So, resolving addictions and mental health and homelessness. These three issues are not separate. They're critically intertwined. People suffer from mental health and addictions for various reasons, often resulting in homelessness, as afflicted people become more and more alienated from society. To resolve these issues, we must look at what are the root causes. And when a society cannot provide the supports to families and individuals, one crisis leads to another. And with COVID-19, we've seen additional stressors placed on personal security. And that's why the Green Party is committed to immediate changes to allow access to mental health services for British Columbians struggling with fear, anxiety, stress, depression, and loneliness. Access for those who otherwise have not had the privilege to afford it. So rolling mental health into the medical services plan, supported by a $1 billion investment in the next 4 years, with enhanced outreach and counseling for the homeless and early intervention for youth, is our commitment. Now, homelessness goes beyond also just mental health. It's also an outcome of a real estate crisis. Housing has become unattainable for many. 43% of the renters spent more than 30% of their income on rent. And the Green Party proposes a means-tested rental support for these low and middle wage earners. The Greens also believe that a livable basic income would provide the necessary personal security so no one is left behind. This has been a party platform for decades. It has taken a pandemic for the other parties and other levels of government to see the economic merits. Our commitments, our ideas, are certainly not at the exclusion of other ideas. We need collaboration. We need to bring them all to the table. Thank you very much. Mayor Tate, back to you.
Thank you for staying within your time. So next up, please, is Kelly Darwin. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor Tate, and thank you, Karen, for the introduction. Addictions, mental health, and homelessness, I believe, while they do overlap, they are separate issues as far as treatment's concerned. Right now, I think we have made a good first step in helping get people off the street by housing them. But what I believe we need to do next, and what I would be committed to doing next, is going through and separating people so that we can better help them. So for example, there's people right now with brain injuries, there's people with mental health issues, and they're being stored in the same places as people with addiction and homeless. And I think if we could take the people with mental health issues and brain issues, put them into a facility where we can actually put in counselors and rehabilitation support workers to help them with their specific needs, then we're going to get a lot more, get a lot more traction in that way. And that goes the same with addiction. Treating somebody with an addiction who is looking to get better is not the same way that you treat homelessness, and it's not the same way that you treat mental health. And so again, if we could put them into a location where we can have counselors and we can have support workers to help them through their issues, as opposed to housing them in the same location where they're going to run into the very people that enable their challenges and cause a lot of the issues themselves. Trapping people away is not the way to fix it. And I believe that this year, that sort of first health crisis that we have in BC, that addiction and fentanyl issue that we have in British Columbia has taken a back seat to COVID, of course, because the news is overwhelming with COVID-19, but we can't forget that it's still out there, and we really need to do what we can to help people get the help that they want, the help that they need, even if sometimes people don't realize that they need it. But there's people out there seeking it, and we need to do better in order to help them. Mary, I'll pass it back to you. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next up is John Horgan. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody involved in this event. And I'm going to start by humbly acknowledging and giving thanks that I'm joining you from the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the Esquimalt and Songhees nations, and recognize other nations in the Langford, Fuca region, the Sauk, Chianu, and Pachidak First Nations. I bring greetings on behalf of my friend John Horgan, who asked that I represent him as he's not able to be on this virtual forum tonight. And he wants you to know that his heart is right here with his community, and he's so very proud to be running for re-election as your candidate. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak on this important topic. Too many lives have been lost to this crisis. Our families, friends, co-workers and neighbours. We're fortunate to have a Minister of Mental Health and Addictions that has a dedicated focus on this critical issue and gives it the time and energy it deserves. And we were seeing a difference. In 2019, overdose deaths were down 36% for the first time in 8 years. And then COVID, and the drug supply became even more toxic. Working with Dr. Henry, we'll continue with A Pathway to Hope, our plan, which outlines a 10-year roadmap for making mental health and addictions care better for people in BC. We will continue to scale up BC's response to the opioid crisis across the spectrum of care, from prevention to alternative medicine, to tackling the design and creation of toxic drugs, to overdose intervention and a range of recovery options. We'll keep expanding the availability of treatment beds. We'll continue to provide mental health care in primary care centres, including those in Langford and Fuca. Our development of strong mental health approaches for kids and young adults will continue to focus on early prevention. With accessible online services, this work is even more critical now, especially for those in more remote and rural areas. We'll continue to establish more Foundry youth centres and dedicate local mental health teams in our schools. And we know that Foundry youth centres are really important in supporting young people, because you can be going there for any reason. They host a whole load of different services. And so there's no stigma of going there because you need counselling, or because you need to talk to somebody about your suicidal ideation, or because you've experienced some kind of abuse. And they really are a one-stop shop and can help along the whole continuum of services that youth need. We'll build on the success of housing thousands of people across the province. And we know that we'll only solve these problems by all of us working together, keeping people safe and getting people who are hurting the treatment and housing they need so they can get back on the right track. This is John's commitment to you. Thank you.
Thank you. That was right on 3 minutes. So next up, please, is Tyson Strandlin. Go ahead, please, Tyson.
Certainly. Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much to the organizers of tonight's event and to the mayor for moderating. I'm very glad to be here, even if here is technically still at home. Now, to begin with, I'd echo the sentiments of the candidates who mentioned that these are separate issues. And you know, the way the question is presently phrased, I think it risks implying that homelessness is something that only affects people who are struggling with their mental health or with addiction. Of course, certainly, you know, people facing these challenges are much more at risk, but there are plenty of people who simply can't afford to live amidst increasingly low wages, high costs of living, and a shortage of affordable housing. Now, that said, I'll speak to each of these issues, and starting with addiction, which has always been dangerous for the people who are affected by it. But today, that's more true than ever, thanks to the toxic drug supply, which has led to skyrocketing numbers of deaths. And of course, what's particularly heartbreaking is that these tragedies are totally preventable. This is why the Communist Party calls for an immediate end to the war on drugs and to the opioid crisis with the establishment of a permanent, safe, legal, and regulated supply of drugs. Increasingly, as social services are eroded and poverty increases, police whose budgets only grow are being called on to deal with vulnerable communities rather than criminals. This is clearly demonstrated in the case of 29-year-old Regis Korchinski-Paquette, who was murdered by police in Toronto during a wellness check being pushed from her balcony. Police are not the ones who should be called on for mental health and wellness checks, least of all involving vulnerable and racialized communities. My party is therefore calling for substantially defunding police and transferring funds to the expansion of mental health services and long-term recovery support programs. Despite the fact that people with disabilities are frequently saddled with additional costs and expenses, disability rates remain desperately inadequate and even less than CERB. The Communist Party therefore demands the immediate doubling of disability and social assistance rates. Myself and members of my party believe that housing, moreover, should be a human right, not a commodity. That's why we're proposing the construction of 100,000 units of new and renovated green, low-income social housing to save lives and reduce the social and health costs of street homelessness. I would also work to ensure the safety of the 2S LGBTQ+ community who are disproportionately affected by homelessness and street violence, as well as ensuring temporary shelter be made available for those fleeing misogyny and domestic violence with the restoration of funding to women's centers and programs. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyson. So that completes our first round of questions. The next one will follow here. Each candidate now will present the actions their party will take over the next 4 years to address business support and economic growth during and post the COVID-19 pandemic. And kicking off this round, our first speaker will be Kelly Darwin. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm a small business owner, like a million other people in British Columbia. 1 million people rely on small business for their livelihood. And we know right now that 25% of businesses say they might not make it through the next year. And that's staggering. I mean, think of that as the numbers of voters, and we need to do something. And I'm a firm believer that the government should create the environment that allows businesses to stimulate the economy. So what I mean by that is I don't believe government creates jobs by hiring people. I think when government hires people for the sake of creating jobs, it's liabilities. I think the government's job is to help small business, help medium business by creating an environment where they can hire people. Let's get people back to work. Let's help them get food on the table. And the way we do this is through support. It's through tax incentives, much like the PST reduction. The BC Liberal Party has said in their platform, we will remove the PST for the first year and we'll bring it back at 3%. The thing I want to point out about this is it's not a big grand announcement to make. It's not some scheme. It's a measured approach that actually has a beginning and an end. This pandemic will end. What we need to make sure is that there's small businesses left over when it actually does come to an end. small business is the fabric of the economy. If we lose that, we're going to lose the economy altogether. And I've been working steadily as a small business advocate right through the COVID crisis, like right when it started. And I'm a lucky guy. I have a business that I can work remote, and I was able to take my staff remote, and we were able to keep working. But as a business to business company, I've seen so many other businesses struggling, and we've had some phenomenal support from our federal government through wage subsidies, through the rent subsidies. And it's been great to help keep people employed, and it's been great to keep businesses open. Not all of us have made it, unfortunately, and a lot of us are a paycheck away or a project or a gig away from going under, and that's not acceptable. We need some help. The provincial government needs to step in and help small business, and that's what I would plan to do. It's the base of the Free Enterprise Party. And I've been fighting for this for a very, very long time, and I'm going to support it for a very, very long time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly. Our next speaker then will be for John Horgan, please.
This pandemic has been so challenging for so many. People are concerned not just about their health, but concerned about their futures and the financial impacts COVID-19 has and will continue to have on households and businesses. So many of our friends and family have lost their jobs. Businesses are struggling to find a new path to success. We saw critical supplies cut off and really recognized how important it is to buy local and to support our local businesses. Thankfully, BC was in a better financial position than any other province to handle the economic impact of COVID-19. John continues to view our approach to this pandemic as twofold: how to manage the health crisis and protect citizens using the best science, and how we invest and build back an economy to support families and businesses. British Columbians have told us that as we work to rebuild BC's economy, we can't go back to the way things were, because that was only working for people at the top. Our plan is to invest an unprecedented $8 billion to support people and kickstart our economy by investing an additional 1% of GDP in people and communities, by building new infrastructure like hospitals and schools, creating 18,000 jobs a year, helping small business by connecting them to experienced mentors and problem solvers, helping expanding and supporting local food chains and helping business access new global markets. We'll provide 15% tax credit for hiring new employees to help spur jobs. We'll recognise that tourism has been especially hard hit, so we'll continue to work with the industry to move towards recovery by acting on the ideas coming from the work being done by the government's tourism task force. To help families spur on the economy, we'll provide a $1,000 direct deposit to families with incomes under $125,000 and slide the scale up to those making $175,000. We'll continue to expand opportunities for parents and families by saving them up to $19,000 a year in childcare costs and delivering the Child Opportunity Benefit. We'll continue to invest in communities, building schools, hospitals, roads, because this makes good economic sense and will support communities to thrive. John's focus is and always will be on people, because people are the economy. By careful planning and helping people succeed, John's plan will do whatever it takes to protect you and your family from the pandemic and its economic impacts and build a recovery that works for everyone.
Thank you very much, Mitzi. Our next speaker will be Tyson Strandlin. Please go ahead.
So the COVID pandemic has certainly worsened, but not caused, the most recent economic downturn, and of which we've only seen just the tip of the iceberg. Capitalist economies are marked by contradictions and instability, boom and bust, lurching from one crisis to the next. And despite the efforts of the ruling classes to keep things together, the capitalist economies the world over are on increasingly shaky ground. The corporate media tries to scare people about socialist countries. But meanwhile, the People's Republic of China has lifted 800 million people from poverty over the last 20 years and has set an extremely effective example in its handling of the pandemic. Despite having 2 months advance warning and a much less densely populated country, Canada to date has approximately 262 deaths per million people from COVID-19, while China has only 3.4. Rest assured, I will never pander to big business. I would put an end to corporate subsidies for oil and gas, and business lobbyists will not be allowed to step foot inside my office. And you can be certain that no one will work harder to protect working class people than myself and members of the Communist Party. That said, we're calling for an immediate increase in the minimum wage to $20 per hour to help catch up to the constantly rising cost of living. By restoring pre-2001 tax rates on corporations and top income earners, we could increase revenues by $2.5 billion. And additionally, we could eliminate taxes on incomes under $40,000. These funds could be redirected to ensure, among other things, that students, teachers, and staff are protected during the pandemic with adequate class sizes and safety measures in place. I would fight to increase spending on every student by $1,000, as well as ending funding and tax breaks for private and religious schools. My party understands the urgency of guaranteeing security for all workers affected by COVID-19 layoffs, including 100% recall rights and wage protection, in addition to full labor standards protection for domestic, agricultural, and migrant workers. Small businesses too would benefit from the imposition of rent controls on commercial properties. Additionally, our 100,000 unit housing plan and green transition would create thousands of good paying jobs in this province. Perhaps most importantly, energy and resources would be placed under public and democratic ownership and control, which would provide a massive source of income for us to invest in green and renewable energy, housing, healthcare, childcare, and things that working class people actually want, rather than pipelines and LNG refining stations or increased police budgets. This is the essence of our program, expanding democracy to the economy for the benefit of working class people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tyson. Our final speaker in this round will be Gord Baird. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor Tate. So I'm a business person. I have been for 25 years, and that doesn't mean that I own this topic. I'm just one voice with a set of solutions and ideas that need to be put into the blender, spun up and strained out. No one expected 2020 to be derailed by a pandemic, but it has shown us where our vulnerabilities lie. And fortunately for BC, we had a great deal of collaboration in the legislature to find immediate supports for those hardest hit. The collaboration and supports have been delayed by this election. We are heading into the winter, the slow season for many businesses, and the tourism and hospitality sector, they're cut to the bone. So the Green Party proposes an immediate rent subsidy of $300 million over the next 6 months to those businesses, and a strategic investment fund to support business innovation of $1 billion. Being forced to work and learn remotely has highlighted like never before the need to have high quality broadband throughout the province. And we are committed to this. And additionally, to work with not-for-profit tourism businesses, cultural facilities, and attractions to develop a separate granting program with a special focus to help our signature businesses that we really don't want to fail. So these are just short-term and they react to the immediate COVID emergency. But what about the climate emergency? We must transition to a zero carbon economy no later than 2045. And the science of the IPCC says that it must be sooner. So in Sonia's words, we can't leave people behind in the transitioning of our economy, but we can't leave our young people behind by not transitioning our economy. So serious clean solutions proposed by the Green Party include diverting $1 billion of subsidies going to the carbon-based fuel industries to address transition training, and to prioritize natural climate solutions that enhance the carbon sink and the rapid electrification of transportation, and to integrate a greenhouse gas emissions lens into all government procurement processes. This process requires collaboration that extends well beyond the 4-year election cycle. This requires working together. Mayor Tate, thank you.
Thank you very much, Gord. Okay, so that completes the second round. So now we'll go into our third one. In this case, each candidate will be asked to present specific actions their party will take over the next 4 years to address affordable housing for youth, families, and seniors. So starting with this round, our first speaker will be John Horgan. Please go ahead.
This is an issue John has been passionate about since day one. It's a problem that's been years in the making and remains one of the biggest issues facing people in our area and all across the province. While we see signs of progress, people are still struggling to afford a place to live. Even with over 700 new affordable housing units for families and seniors in the Souk and West Shore alone, we know we need to continue to work hard to tackle this crisis. Because while we see signs of progress, people are still struggling to buy and rent. We will support municipalities like Souk to develop housing strategies that fit their community's needs. The speculation and vacancy tax has really started to work. We've seen 11,000 more housing units put back on the rental market in 2019. We're capping rents to 2021 and providing a renter's rebate of $400 a year for households making up to $80,000 a year. Whether you rent or own, we know that families are looking for more availability, better security, and more affordability. John and all of our team are committed to our 10-year Homes for BC plan, which has already led to tens of thousands of affordable rental and supportive homes for people, and we will continue this vital work. Our 10-year plan includes a range of housing, affordable housing, creating a range of sizes of units so that families can be accommodated, supportive housing so that the most vulnerable can also have all the wraparound services they need, modular housing where quick solutions are needed and all services can be available, the wraparound model. And here we could be helping people off the street or out of parks. By providing them with dignity, privacy and security, they're better positioned to be on that pathway to recovery and being able to live independently. Mixed development housing with the Housing Hub, bringing different partners together to create housing projects that are sympathetic to the local neighbourhood and provide a range of housing options developed with local partners. Transition housing, very important to John, as he knew our community of West Shore didn't have one. Women facing domestic violence and their kids had to go to Souk or Victoria. And for the first time in 20 years, investments are being made in transition and second stage housing. And here in West Shore, we're fortunate enough to have one of those new transition houses. We're building thousands of student housing units, which will open up more long-term rentals for seniors and families. And we're improving our existing housing stock. It takes longer to build new than to make sure our existing housing is no longer usable. We're helping BC families.
Thank you, Mitzi. Our next speaker on this topic will be Tyson Strandland. Please go ahead.
So as mentioned earlier, my party is pushing for 100,000 units of green, low-income social housing in order to ensure not only an end to homelessness, but to housing precarity. I firmly believe in the urgent necessity for a ban on repugnant practices such as rent evictions and dem evictions, and the need to increase renter representation on tenancy boards to help guarantee the protection of tenants rather than landlords. My party is further calling for a ban on all evictions during the COVID-19 pandemic and the legislation of strict rent controls. The idea that anyone should spend the majority of their time working one or more underpaid jobs in order to pay a landlord's mortgage, or worse still, for the profits of some corporate property management company, to me is an abhorrent crime and is completely at odds with the principles of a democratic society. If you're a renter, I say your life is worth more than that, and I'm fighting for you. Here on Vancouver Island, that's 2/3 of the population. We have an abundance of material wealth in this province, and there is no reason we should not be able to provide for everyone. There is another island in the Caribbean that's been under embargo from the world's largest economy for more than half a century. It has a long history of exploitation, colonialism, and oppression, not entirely dissimilar from other countries in the region. except that Cuba's people threw off their chains and pursued a path of socialist construction. Today in tiny Cuba, 90% of people own their own home, and the remaining 10% pay less than a tenth of their income in rent for social housing. If sanctioned and blockaded Cuba can achieve that for its people, why can't we here in BC? Another thing Cuba provides for its citizens is free, quality post-secondary education. There's frankly no excuse for us here not to be doing the same. Now, lastly, I want to take the opportunity to speak to the need to eliminate for-profit care homes for seniors. It's been thoroughly demonstrated that private for-profit care homes do not provide the same level of care for the money as public care homes. A system in which seniors are treated as nothing more than sources of profit is totally unacceptable. It needs to be replaced with quality, publicly owned and controlled long-term care facilities, a point which I believe is emphasized by the COVID-19 outbreaks which have occurred in a number of these substandard institutions due to the negligent mismanagement and the cutting of corners to maximize profits. I would never want my parents or grandparents forced to live in such a place, and I think most people probably feel the same. The seniors in this province deserve far better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tyson. Our next speaker will be Gord Baird. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor Tate. Well, we can all agree here on the screen that British Columbians should not have to pit food, housing, childcare, or health costs among each other. I'm privileged to live in my own house, albeit it is made out of earthen materials. But I will say that at today's rental rates, I would be unable to afford to pay the going rate for the space that I live in with my income. So let that sink in. A lot of people will say that growing the economy will help lift all boats, and growing the economy isn't going to solve it. And I like to say that if growth were to solve all the ills of our society, Vancouver would be paradise. They suffer the same woes, just more of them. Growing new housing stock that is market driven also isn't the solution. It is a big part of the problem. So the Green Party is committed to expanding access to diverse housing. And that looks like developing non-market housing and accelerating investments to affordable, supportive, and social housing, as well as to expand supports for co-ops by extending leases and creating land banks, providing security of tenure. Additionally, the Green Party would work with local governments to expand the missing middle, townhouses and triplexes, and to establish a capital fund to support the acquisition and maintenance of rental housing by nonprofits. I mentioned it earlier, but in terms of supporting renters, the Green Party would introduce a means-tested grant that applies to low and moderate earners who are paying more than 30% of their net income to rent. And the other thing that pops up is addressing the cost of strata insurance. And the Green Party would convene a task force to deal with the rising costs of strata insurance and develop solutions as soon as the BC Financial Services Authority completes their investigation. Other means to support families beyond housing, but help with housing, is establishing such things as early childhood education for 3 to 4-year-olds in the education system to both provide early education support, but also to free up childcare costs, and to offer free childcare for parents with children under 3. And I agree with Tyson that we have to realize the ills that the for-profit system has had for seniors care, and the Green Party will transition away from for-profit seniors care to a mix of public, not-for-profit, community-based, and co-op housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Gord. Our next speaker will be Kelly Darwin. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to start with seniors. Seniors deserve a whole heck of a lot better than the way they get treated right now in our province. There's countless studies that have shown that the longer a senior can live at home, the better the quality of life and the longer life that they're going to lead. Now, I experienced this myself when I was when I was young, we built a suite in our house so my great grandmother could stay and live in the suite with us. And not only did that help her have a better quality of life because we were there around all the time, but it gave me a better quality of life because I learned things. I learned how to cook. I learned how to do paintings. I learned how to do all sorts of stuff in history and what it was like to be in London when the Blitzkrieg came and all that. And it really enriched my life. And they deserve us to be able to do that back. And one of the things in our platform is that we'll provide tax credits of $7,000 a year, up to $20,000, to put towards things like housekeeping, home repairs, supportive care. If we could build secondary suites or secondary locations to look after our family, it takes the stress off those home cares that everyone's talking about. And that's really what we need to do is to provide a better life and take stress off the areas that are not quite working well because they're overcrowded and they're overworked. And it breaks my heart to think right now we have seniors out there that have to decide between medicine and food when we're giving away cell phones downtown. I don't understand it, and we need to do better. Along that same line, and we're talking about building suites, that's also eventually going to add more inventory onto the rental market. Housing is, as we all know, is just insane in British Columbia. And there's a report that came out today by the CBC that says housing across British Columbia has gone up 13% in the last year, September 2019 to September 20th. That's a problem, 13% in 1 year. I don't believe the speculation tax is working, but I think the idea behind it could be working. But right now we're punishing people that have saved, they've scrimped and saved, grandparents built cabins out at the lake, and now we're hitting them with these high taxes. So we need to produce more inventory on the market. One of the roadblocks to that inventory is the cost of construction, the cost of labor. Another item that we'll put forth with the PST will make it cheaper to buy houses or build houses. It'll make it cheaper to build condominiums and apartments, so we can increase the supply, lower the demand, and get the rental costs under control.
Thank you very much, Kelly. So we're now into our next round here. And in this one, each candidate will present the specific actions their party will take over the next 4 years to address challenges of transportation with urban growth and livability. And starting on this subject will be Tyson Strandlin. Tyson, please go ahead.
So the personal automobile is not something that necessarily came naturally as the primary mode of transportation for so many people as it is today. Rather, the oil and gas industry, which has such immense power in this country, as in many others, has long pushed for it and promoted it, and getting their supporters in government deliberately have allowed public transport to fall behind. As a result, hundreds of kilometers of rail have been removed over the years on Vancouver Island. Public transport, on the other hand, is more efficient, produces less greenhouse gas emissions, reduces traffic, and is ultimately a far safer means of transport than personal automobiles, be that by bus or by rail. My aunt was actually killed in a car accident on the Malahat, so my family knows how inadequate infrastructure can lead to tragedy. Here on the island, I am a huge supporter of proposals for the restoration of the Vancouver Island Rail Corridor as just such an alternative. In order to maximize ridership and efficiency, I'd fight to completely eliminate all bus and rail fares across the province, while providing funding to ensure expanded routes and more regular schedules. The increase in bus and rail ridership will reduce the number of cars on the road, which is not only good for our environment, but saves everyone time stuck in traffic that could be spent relaxing or spending time with family, etc. We are long overdue for a transit strategy that's for working people, not just big oil and for developers interested in packing in unaffordable condos. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tyson. Next up here will be Gord Baird. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Tate. So 18 months ago, I had a car. 18 months ago, I challenged myself and my wife, Ann, to go 1 year without using it. And we actually sold the car and got 2 electric bikes. I live in the Highlands. It's not flat. I ride to clients in Souk, Shawnigan Lake, Gulf Islands, Metro Vancouver. I'm 51. And this has keenly made me aware of the transportation winners and losers in the region and in this riding. So this riding is not a stellar example of good multimodal transportation. Langford has actually done pretty well, and I commend them. But the smaller communities do not have the same resources. And I mean, I love the Galloping Goose, but from my house to Souk, it's an extra 7 kilometers. So I use the Highway 14 to get from my house to Souk. I certainly haven't heard mention of any reference to multimodal approach on Highway 14 upgrade. And I think that is critical in any future infrastructure plans. When I look to Souk, I see that there's a debate over, free youth passes versus not enough ridership to support the increased bus passes. And this tells me that the funding model is broken. And the Green Party would work with local governments to redesign the transit funding model and have it shifted so that it's not reliant on ridership and property taxes. When you look to Langford, and several years ago, watching Mayor Young, he was creatively trying to solve the bus transit issue from Langford to the core of Victoria. The roadway between Langford and the core is a provincial highway. That is the provincial responsibility. The Green would establish a regional transit governance body to overcome the fractured decision-making, and we would build the public transport links between the cities that we need. I heard someone say not too long ago that getting on the bus only gets you halfway there. But I'd say that perhaps it's time that we get off that wrong bus and consider more creative ways to get us all the way there. Thank you. Mayor Tate?
Thank you very much, Gord. Our next speaker will be Kelly Darwin. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. So my co-host on my podcast and I have a little joke going, because no matter what we talk about, I always end up talking about transportation in the West Shore. Obviously, we're all in the West Shore. We know there's a transportation issue and it needs to be addressed. So I have 2 things to talk about in this. Number one is we're not going to solve our transportation issue out here with one fell swoop. We know the Mackenzie overpass, while it was needed and maybe about 25 years too late, it's helping, but it's only one small piece of a much larger puzzle. And when we start to look at the developments that are happening and the infrastructure that needs to follow those developments, now is the time to start planning those things. And specifically thinking of Royal Bay and Royal Beach, where there's going to be almost 3,000 new living units, and all those folks are going to try and drive somewhere. And that's just not going to work. And we see the same thing on Bear Mountain and in the West Hills and on Skirt Mountain. One of the more creative solutions we've heard from Mayor Rob Martin in Colwood is the passenger ferry from Royal Beach to downtown. That's something that will make a massive difference. And that's something we need to look at. We need to look at rail. We need to look at things like the trolley. In Langford, we used to have the trolley. And when my son was in secondary at Belmont, they took the trolley around. And I bet if that thing was still going now, you'd have teenagers using that as opposed to putting more cars on the road. So that's definitely something we need to look at is the approach we take to transportation. Props to Gord for riding the bike to the Highlands. I lived in the Highlands for a few years, and you can only see me from this far up, so you don't know it, but I probably wouldn't be able to ride that. So good for you. The other thing we need to look at is what I think is will take care of one of the biggest transportation issues is just take people off the road. And how we do that is by continuing to develop places for people to work in the West Shore. So if we don't want to clog up that highway, let's just get people off it. Let's keep them at home. COVID has shown us that we can work at home quite successfully. We don't need to get into that Colwood crawl. Let's keep people home. Let's give some incentives to businesses to develop out here, but develop in a way that you can hop on a trolley or you can hop on a rail and you can get from home to work in an easy way. Because if we don't make it easy, people are just not going to use it. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Our next speaker is John Horgan.
Well, both John and I live in the West Shore and we work downtown. So we know firsthand the challenges of moving around throughout our region. Indeed, previously, I actually lived in Shirley and commuted from there into the West Shore. And I've seen a really, really big increase in traffic in the past 10 to 12 years. So it is an issue. And in West Shore and Souk, families have been commuting also for daycare for too long. So imagine the stress and the waste of time for families sitting in gridlock, getting to childcare, then maybe even onto school and then work, and doing that in reverse as well, and all the other places they need to go. Families want and need to spend more time together, not on the road sitting in gridlock. And we know that gridlock isn't just bad for our environment too, but it limits our local economy because people just can't get their goods and services moving. And I hear from local businesses that they keep drivers off the roads at certain times of the day because of the congestion. Our region is still growing, and so it deserves our share of the investments. And that's why transportation and safety upgrades to our communities, like Highway 14, like priority bus lanes on the Trans-Canada Highway. These buses are now zipping past the sitting traffic on the highway. Now, maybe that will entice more people to actually use transit. The Mackenzie interchange, people are telling me that they actually are saving up to half an hour each way these days now that that's been, the underpass has been opened. And of course, the Lee Road 4-lane safety upgrades. All of these have been so critical. Our South Island transportation strategy will ensure we meet short, medium, and long-term goals to provide more active transportation infrastructure and rapid bus services to the growing West Shore and Souk community. And our communities are going to continue to grow. And as they develop, we do need to be thinking of alternatives. For example, the pilot project of having offices in the West Shore. And now, the experiment that has been COVID and so many people working from home. I actually wrote to ministers to say, please have a look at how this can be supported in an ongoing, sustainable way with more people working from home in a safe and supported way. And we want to work with communities to expand active transportation as we move towards our Clean BC goal of doubling trips by walking, biking, and other kinds of active networks. We live in a region where people and goods move between different jurisdictions, so we need to work with everyone and all the transit corridors around our whole region. We'll give people more choices and we'll continue to promote cleaner communities and better health. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitzi. Okay, that brings us to our next round. In this one, each candidate will present the specific actions their party will take over the next 4 years to address climate change action plans to 2030 and not 2050. Starting in this round will be Gord Baird. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Tate. Where do you start? For me, I started 15 years ago, and that is where my business is focused. I think about Wayne Gretzky, what he said is that you skate to where the puck is going to be and not to where it's been. And unfortunately, our successive governance has not passed the puck. So we are in a climate and an ecological emergency. So what does that look like close to home? So I sit as the vice chair for the CRD Regional Water Supply. We've never had to worry about filtering our water. We have an amazingly intact watershed ecosystem in our watershed. But now with the increased threat of fires and increased water temperatures in our reservoir, this region is going to be saddled with a $1 billion plus upgrade to respond to the impacts of ash and to pull colder water from deeper in the reservoir. That's pretty close to home. So we require decisive legislation and massive investment of financial resources to support the just transition training, retraining programs, and for those in the most impacted. And we also require additional funding, and we'll put additional funding towards infrastructure projects that we need to adapt. There are a lot of jobs needed. There's not near enough time to list the Green Party solutions here, but here's my pick of my top 10. We need to adjust the antiquated legislation that only sees the value of an asset once it's extracted. We need to place a value on natural assets and an ecosystem services. You protect what you value. We need to end the $1 billion in subsidies to fossil fuels. We need to put those funds towards business innovation and just transition training. We need to rapidly electrify public transit. We need to provide PST exemptions for EVs and all e-bikes. And we need to enable the PACE program, the Property Assessed Clean Energy Fund, which allows homeowners to access funds for retrofits for heat pumps. And it's something that municipalities have been screaming for. We need to create a food secure BC strategy. We need to incentivize local regenerative agriculture. We need to increase our carbon sinks. So we need to focus on creating business strategies to regenerate our forests, our soils, and our wetlands. It's the quickest and lowest hanging fruit to sequester carbon. We need to support local governments with novel funding specifically directed at actions to protect and remove risk to the communities. We need to stop any new fossil fuel infrastructure, no new LNG. And we need to set interim climate targets for 2025 as we work towards being carbon neutral by 2045. Physics doesn't care about politics, but that doesn't mean that politicians shouldn't care about physics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Gord. Okay, next up, our speaker will be Kelly Darwin. Go ahead.
Thanks. I'm new to politics, so I'm going to try something, and I'm going to be honest and say that I'm not an expert in climate change. If there's a silver lining to COVID, it's that it's shown me that this is something that we need to pay attention to. I believe that this pandemic is partially a symptom of climate change. After seeing the pictures, and I think this is the entrepreneur in me, seeing the pictures of Beijing going from you can't see the buildings to clear skies, and the pictures of Venice of the dirty water, and all of a sudden, after a few months of the pandemic and everything shut down, you can see again. It's really shown me that this is something we can achieve. Mother Earth will fix itself, but we have to give it the chance. And that's going to be difficult. And we're not going to do that by 2030. Let's be honest. This microphone, this webcam, my cell phone, everything has oil in it. And so to say that, okay, we're going to stop producing oil right now today, it's just not going to happen because there's so many other countries in the world that don't have the benefit or the technology to do that yet, even if we do. So what we need to do is we need to take baby steps, and we need to have that goal in mind and figure out how we're going to get there in a realistic manner. So sounding the alarm certainly gets everybody's attention, but it doesn't solve the problem. From what I understand, and like I said, I'm not a climate expert, but I understand that LNG burns a lot cleaner than coal or oil. So let's move in that direction. One thing I've learned through my life is the only way you're ever going to get anybody to do anything is to make them want to do it. So we need to be able to show people that taking these cleaner steps are going to make these differences. And like I said, COVID's given us an opportunity to see that difference is a realistic goal. We can reach that. And I think there's going to be, just like the transportation, there's going to be a lot of different little ways that all work together to do that. We're really lucky to live where we live. If we look at the West Coast, we have tremendous waves. We have tremendous wind. Maybe not as much sun as we'd like to have, but through the wind and the water, there's some opportunity there to bring in alternative sources. So we can start to wean ourselves off of fossil fuels and start looking towards cleaner alternative energy sources. But to be honest, they're not there yet. We need to get there. We need to fund scientists. We need to fund people that are going to be able to invent more efficient ways of getting that energy. And we'll do it. We'll do it hopefully as a leader in the world right here in BC. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Our next speaker will be Juan Horgan.
Well, I'm so pleased to speak on this critically important issue. We are in a climate crisis. We need to protect our land, sea, and air. And this is urgent. We need for our children and their children to inherit a province that is clean, protected, and sustainable. The next few years are really critical in how we move BC forward to cleaner energy and reduced climate pollution. Our province has a plan. We have Clean BC. This is the most ambitious climate strategy on the whole continent. And we'll continue to take the steps needed to protect more of BC's unique natural heritage. When the Climate Change Accountability Act was passed, it meant that there became a legal requirement for government accountability on emission targets. And we know that people want to do their bit to tackle the climate crisis. People want to bring down their own emissions and want to reduce the energy they use. I know people watching this forum are conscious of their own footprint, and we will continue to provide support and grant programs and assistance so that you can play your part in our reduction of emissions. Rebates for electric vehicles and home efficiency upgrades. And these refunds and these programs will be continued, and we'll keep making it easier for more and more people to be able to access electric vehicles and e-bikes. Have you noticed how many of those are around these days? We're going to keep investing in low and middle income families, like the increasing carbon price rebates has done. We're also going to begin to phase out single-use plastics across the province. And regulation of big polluters will also continue. So they will be enforced to reduce their pollution, and we can direct the carbon tax that they pay to cleaner operations. We're going to implement the recommendations of the Old Growth Strategic Review, because this is designed to further protect old growth and biodiversity and large iconic trees in our forests. We'll continue with the largest modernisation of schools in BC's history, with a focus on not only meeting seismic requirements, but climate change and energy efficiency standards as set out in our Clean BC plan. With continuing to put our Clean BC strategy into action, we'll keep moving forward by embedding it into the work we're doing to rebuild our economy as we recover from the impact of COVID-19 and ensure we do the much needed work that is so critical to the future of our province and our planet. Because we all want to protect for future generations the natural environment that we are all so proud of. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitzi. Our next speaker will be Tyson Strandland. Go ahead, please.
So perhaps some of you have heard me recite this quote before, but the words of American historian Dr. Michael Parenti are always worth repeating, I think. The essence of capitalism is to turn nature into commodities and commodities into capital. The live green earth is transformed into dead gold bricks with luxury items for the few and toxic slag heaps for the many. The glittering mansion overlooks a vast sprawl of shanty towns wherein a desperate, demoralized humanity is kept in line with drugs, television, and armed force, end quote. You see, the destruction of our environment is not an aspect of capitalism that can be tweaked, reformed, or altered. Ecological devastation is an inherent and inexorable part of capitalism in the same way as racism, sexism, poverty, and exploitation. The logic of capitalism is such that profit will always and must always come before all else, putting life at this planet at risk. We are in a severe crisis, and like many people, I'm frequently depressed and frankly afraid, thinking of what the future holds for us. We need an urgent and radical solution, and that solution is socialism, and the realization of democracy. In understanding the limitations of capitalist parliamentary democracy, especially under first past the post, it's essential that we work not just in the legislature, but in the streets with the mass movements and labor unions and in our workplaces and schools in order to force capitalist governments and bourgeois parties to accept concessions and ultimately to yield to working class power. As long as corporations and the rich maintain control, we won't be reaching climate goals even by 2100, let alone 2030. By putting all resources and energy under public and democratic ownership and control, we would free up a massive source of revenue that could be transferred towards conservation and a transition to green and renewable energy sources. I believe we need to end hydrocarbon emissions now. As I've always said, I would fight to stop the disastrous Site C dam, the logging of old growth forests, fracking and LNG, the Coastal GasLink fossil fuel project, and the Trans Mountain expansion. Additionally, the expansion of public transit and elimination of fees would further help us reduce emissions. Indigenous peoples have long protected and sustainably managed these lands, and I believe decolonization must be central to our environmental strategy. Indigenous peoples have a deep connection with the land and immense knowledge of BC's incredible and diverse ecosystems. The restoration of their sovereignty would be a major step towards guaranteeing ecological integrity, which is gravely threatened by capitalism and imperialism. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyson. So that completes this round. Our next set here, each candidate will present the specific actions their party will take over the next 4 years to address a meaningful alliance with Indigenous peoples. Our first speaker will be Kelly Darwin.
I guess the first thing I want to say is I don't think a meaningful alliance comes out of government policy. It comes out of respect and intention. I was very lucky as part of the West Shore Chamber Board on a board development exercise we did with the Indigenous Perspective Society. We were lucky enough to learn and get some insight into dealing with Indigenous peoples. And one of the questions that came up was around how we conduct our meetings and specifically what is the proper and respectful way to do the acknowledgement. And we had an elder there talking with us, and so this was the question we presented, because we wanted to make sure we were doing it properly in a respectful way. And his answer was, forget all of that stuff. Don't worry about the wording. Don't worry about the gestures. Approach the acknowledgement with an open mind and an open heart, and be genuine. And that is the secret to approaching any meaningful alliance. One of the other things that I always think about when we talk about this subject is Henry Chips from Beecher Bay, who was on our board for a long time. And one of our goals was to engage with Indigenous peoples, entrepreneurs, and businesses more, in fact, in a more meaningful way, but also just generally in more. How do we attract more Indigenous peoples into the chamber? And it started out with, well, we got to create a committee that's going to talk to people, and he said, no. He goes, just start with asking. Just say, hey, do you want to come and check out what we do? And he said, they might say no the first 20 times, but the 21st time they might say yes. And that's how we move forward. We be patient, we be respectful, we approach people with an open mind, an open heart, and we be genuine. And that's how we're all going to create meaningful alliances together.
Thank you, Kelly. Our next speaker will be for John Horgan, please.
Well, it's my honour this evening to start off by saying a thank you to Elder Shirley Alphonse. She's special elder to the Premier, and she says a prayer for him each and every day, and he is so thankful for her friendship and her always very sage advice. One of the proudest moments that John and I have had was when BC became the first province in Canada to enshrine the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples into law. And it was a really emotional time in the legislature. We were even like lifting our desks and sharing tissues from desk to desk. By ensuring meaningful consultation is a priority, not just for him, but for all cabinet ministers, John will ensure that working together, we will continue to take important steps to start the process of reconciliation. And there is so much more that we can do. We'll continue to support the revitalization of First Nations languages, like putting additional languages into BC's school curriculum and reflecting Indigenous people's history and cultures in provincial parks and wilderness areas. Personally, I've had the honor of learning Horgan language from an elder, and my daughter learns Indigenous language in her elementary school, and we'll continue with programs like that. The long-term agreement to guarantee 25 years of revenue sharing with First Nations has made BC the first and only province to support the building of on-reserve housing, with 1,750 new homes coming both on and off reserve. One of our guiding principles is lasting and meaningful reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and communities. John and a BC NDP government would move towards long-term agreements that provide greater self-determination, support reconciliation, and economic independence. And we would improve on our work internally as a government, creating a dedicated secretariat to ensure that new legislation and policies are consistent with the UN Declaration. We'll also expand our support of Aboriginal friendship centres so we can better help to connect urban Indigenous peoples with their own communities. This is foundational work for us, and as many of you know, John has been engaged in this work locally and throughout the province. He has always felt honoured to be invited to local ceremonies and community events like tribal journeys. I hope many of you were present at, and the special celebrations we've had on Indigenous Day. As your MLA, he will continue to move forward in the spirit of partnership and reconciliation, because the work we do as a government and all of us as citizens of BC needs to continue to build on this lasting legacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mitzi. Our next speaker will be Tyson Strandlin.
So some of you may know a certain relative of mine, the Métis revolutionary, Louis Riel, founder of the province of Manitoba, who fought for his people's right to self-determination in alliance with First Nations in order to create a just and multicultural society that respected the rights of all nations, and who was hung by Prime Minister John A. Macdonald. There are others too in this revolutionary tradition, such as the Métis communist Jim Brady. And as a member of the Métis Nation, I am proud to be running for a party that carries on that legacy of solidarity and resistance. It is troubling, however, how few people in this province understand the depth of the horrific history that Canada has been a part of. For example, that John A. Macdonald was a promoter of the cult of the Aryan race long before Adolf Hitler, or that the very term final solution used by the Third Reich in reference to the extermination of Jewish people was first coined in 1910 by Canada's Minister of Indian Affairs, Duncan Campbell Scott. But this is not simply about history. In 2019, a federal government inquiry found that Canada is complicit in the ongoing genocide of Indigenous people today. The UN was founded on the principle of self-determination of nations, something which is denied to Indigenous nations within the Canadian state. Indigenous nations are nations and deserve to be treated as such, which is why my party calls for full recognition of Indigenous title to all traditional territories. We demand an immediate end to resource projects on Indigenous lands without full consultation and approval, as well as to violations of Bill 41, the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. The Communist Party stands in full solidarity with all Indigenous people struggling for justice and sovereignty. That said, I would consider myself unworthy not only of your vote, but even to call myself Métis if I failed in this moment to condemn in the harshest terms the violent RCMP raid on unceded Wet'suwet'en territory approved by none other than John Horgan, who couldn't even be here tonight.
Okay, let's stay within the rules.
Breaking the rules, but not for speaking the truth. Che Guevara famously said that if you tremble with indignation at every injustice, then you're a comrade of mine. If you, like myself and members of my party, cannot sit idly and politely amid such unacceptable injustice, then I invite you to join our movement and to help us win the fight for decolonization and for socialism. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tyson. Our final speaker will be Gord Baird. Go ahead, please, Gord.
Thank you, Mayor Tate. And thanks, Kelly, for those words. I resonated with them. Respect, intention, and genuine. There's two words here for me in this topic that are critical, and those words are meaningful and alliance. And meaningful is only achieved if the activities are authentic, and authenticity is achieved first through truth and then through reconciliation. And alliance is achieved only through collaboration. As we look towards UNDRIP, collaboration is the only way forward. And we need to recognize that the biggest roadblock is fearfulness. Fearfulness to engage in meaningful and collaborative dialogue, and fearfulness to co-govern and have collaborative decisions on land use and natural assets. It's a tough one to try and wrap your head around. The BC government committed to UNDRIP in November 2019. And to date, we have one law, the Environmental Assessment Act, that has been changed to reflect UNDRIP, though it hasn't been implemented yet. In the meantime, we've got a public service sector that has few guidelines on how to consult with First Nations, resulting in processes being inadequate and inconsistent. When it comes to defining free, prior, and informed consent, it shouldn't be done through the courts. It needs to be done together. And the Green Party is committed to creating an action plan as required under the legislation to implement the Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, DRIPA. We need to work in collaboration with First Nations to ensure energy independence following the BC Utility Commission's recommendations to support Indigenous-owned utilities. We need to work in partnership to preserve the wild salmon and rebuild the fishery. We need to move away from the colonial Ministry of Children and Family Development and support Indigenous-led child welfare programs in their communities to keep families together and stay healthy. And we need to assist establishing Indigenous-led public health care services by supporting the training of Indigenous doctors. And we need to promote cultural training for all healthcare practitioners across BC. This journey, there's a lot of threads and fibers to braid together, and we need to trust that the braid is stronger than any of those threads alone. Mayor Tate, thank you.
Thank you, Gord, and many thanks to all of our candidates for participating tonight. That concludes all of the presentations, as well as all of the all candidate commentaries. So I'll now pass this back to the chamber for their closing remarks.
Thank you, Mayor Tate. Well, I would just like to start off by saying what a pleasure it has been for the West Shore Chamber of Commerce to collaborate with the Souk Region Chamber and the Souk Multi-Belief Initiative on this event. And I hope everybody who has been attending has had a chance to get a good sense of the party platforms. Thank you to all of the candidates for offering yourself to service to the province. And thank you, Mayor Tate, for moderating. I don't know about you, but I feel really blessed that we live in a place where we can vote. So all of you who are attending, I have no doubt you have every intention of voting. The early polls are open now, and Elections BC recommends that if you've got a mail-in ballot, that you get it in by Saturday, that's October the 17th, so that it can be in time. And that is as much as I have to say. Thank you all very much for your participation and for your attendance this evening. And I wish you all the best in the rest of your campaigns. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks.
Yes, it's not right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Wonderful presentations. Thanks for staying in the bounds of the limits of the minutes. I thought they were very informative. I just wish we
Excellent.
could-
Yeah.
I
Excellent.
just
forum.
wish we could get everybody together to come up with the best solutions because you all got terrific ideas. Got to find somehow get everybody together rather than this adversarial approach.
Maybe next time.
Again, as from the Souk Chamber, I'd really like to thank all of the candidates for your time tonight and for excellent presenting your positions. Thank you very much. And Maya, as always, you did a great job of moderating. So thank you very much.
Did a terrific
No,
job.
thanks everyone for the opportunity. There was a few tech glitches that were entirely my fault, so sorry about that.
No,
Anyway,
you did excellent. Thank you very much, Maya. It was a wonderful, wonderful job.
Yes.
And,
okay. Good luck, everyone. Be safe and healthy out on the campaign trail. And I know what it's like to campaign. So thank you so much for putting your names forward and for getting out there and for doing your best. So all the best, and to everyone else, stay healthy and stay well. Thank you.